Hello and welcome to Economics A-Level on YouTube. In this video we're going to look at demand and how it functions, so therefore we're going to look at the law of demand. So this is a demand curve. Let's first of all begin by defining demand, and demand in economics is defined as the quantity of goods or services that a consumer or buyer is willing and able to purchase at a given price over a given period of time, assuming all other factors remain constant. And you can see that the demand curve is made up of two variables, price and quantity demanded. So the interaction of those two produces that demand curve. These two variables we call internal variables because they are the only two variables on that graph, and the interaction of those produces that demand curve. So therefore they're called internal variables. We'll look in the next video at external variables, things like income and fashion and trends and so forth, but they're not part of the axis of the demand curve graph, and therefore they're not called internal variables like price and quantity are. One further thing to say is that it's price that influences the quantity and not the other way around. And this should make some sort of sense because if you think about it, when you go to a shop, a consumer, a buyer, you and me, that's the first thing we're going to be thinking about, the price of the good, and therefore that's going to influence how much demand we're going to have for that product. So there's two variables, they're internal variables, price and quantity demanded. These make up the demand curve, and the interaction of these through price influencing quantity is what gives us our demand curve as seen on that graph there. So now we need to look at how price actually affects quantity demanded. So you can see from this graph here that we've started originally at P and Q at point A, and we've lowered the price to P1. So what we can see from this is that as we lower price, quantity demanded along the bottom axis there rises from Q to Q1. And we call this an inverse relationship because as price falls, quantity demanded rises. The opposite would also be true. And you've got to think why this is. So if price falls, why does quantity demand increase? And that's because goods become more affordable to the consumer on their income. And don't forget, from the definition of demand, we've assumed that all other factors have remained constant, so therefore income has not changed. And so therefore, if the price falls, the demand for a good should rise because goods become more affordable on that income that consumers had originally. You can see, therefore, that as we move from P to P1, and therefore from Q to Q1, that we've moved from point A to point B along that demand curve. And we call this a movement along the demand curve. If, as in this case, quantity has increased from Q to Q1, we call this an expansion or an extension of demand. The opposite, therefore, is also true. If, as on this graph, we start at P and Q and point A, and we increase price to P1, then quantity demanded is going to fall from Q to Q1. As before, assuming all other factors are constant, the reason why quantity demanded for the good will fall is because at a higher price, goods become less affordable, assuming we've got the same amount of income as before, and therefore fewer goods will be purchased, and we lose the amount of demand that is between Q and Q1 for that product. Again, we move along the demand curve from point A to point B, but this time we call that a contraction of demand, i.e. it's getting smaller. So in summary, the law of demand is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. They are the two internal variables that form that demand curve. Price affects quantity, not the other way around, and we can see that as price falls, quantity increases and vice versa. We move along the demand curve if we're not looking at supply alongside it, and it's only price that has changed. If we increase the amount of demand, that's called an extension of demand, and if it falls, it's called a contraction of demand. One final thing is that the demand shown on a demand curve is called effective demand, and this means that it's the amount of demand or the amount of a good that can actually be afforded by a consumer at a given price, not what you'd just like to buy in general. So for example, I might want to buy a Ferrari, but I can guarantee that I do not have the budget for a Ferrari, so that is not effective demand for a product. Effective demand is only when it's backed up by the ability to purchase the good. In the next video, I'm going to look at the factors or determinants of demand aside from price. So we've just looked at price. In the next video, we'll look at all the external factors of demand. So please click now if you want to go to that. If not, please click on the link below to see more videos and to subscribe. Thank you.